I've never played a roguelike or roguelite or... Honestly, at this point, I'm almost too afraid to ask. What's the difference? I usually play competitive games. I've been playing online PvP-focused competitive games since 8-Ball Pool on AOL back in 2002. And if you're under the age of 30, you probably just left this video. My bad, dude. Anyways, I just picked up Hades on a whim, and it's changed my life. I've heard great things about it. I thought the art style looked really cool, and a close friend of mine recommended it, so I figured I'd pull the trigger and give it a shot. Obviously, I've played single-player games before. I've been gaming since my memory first activated back in the 90s, but when I think of single-player games, my competitive game brain rot just takes over and pictures an open-world RPG with 1,000 pointless fetch quests, and I just black out and find myself in a Rocket League lobby battling Smurfs and crybabies. Every so often, I'm reminded that a single-player game can still scratch my competitive itch without all the online ranking systems and slurs. That's exactly what Hades did for me. Not only was the core gameplay loop one of the best loops I've ever experienced, it managed to ignite my competitive fire as I worked against beating the game and then my best times and, of course, the ultimate goal of a 32 heat run. I even got every Steam achievement for this game, which was the first time I've ever done that on Steam. I can't believe I missed out on how amazing this game was for nearly 5 years, and only God knows how many roguelikes I could have been enjoying for the last 10 plus years. With all that said, strap in. This is my few years too late video essay on Hades. It's rare that a game's art style alone can pull me in, but from the cover art to the isometric camera to the color palette, there's not a single part of this game's design that I don't enjoy. Even the blood gushing out of Zagreus after a death is just weirdly beautiful. I think even if the gameplay were awful, the art style of this game would have at least made me try this game, and I don't usually care about art that much. Hell, most of the games I play competitively, I'm turning the textures down to the bare minimum so I can just get like an extra 3 frames or whatever. Hades' art style really grabbed my eye and pulled me in, and that seems to be a common sentiment about this game. When I think of storytelling in the few single-player games I have played, I think of cutscenes with 3D character models jankily interacting with one another, and I thought that's what I wanted in a story-driven game. I don't think I've ever actually played a game where the storytelling is largely just 2D sprites talking to each other while the actual gameplay is essentially paused. Unless you count the Game Boy era of Pokemon? If you would have asked me which of these two storytelling styles I would have preferred before playing Hades, I would have easily picked the first one. I'd go as far as to say the 2D style thing was definitely a turnoff to me before I actually played a game with it, and it's really changed how I just view storytelling in a game, period. No amount of 3D cutscenes would have been able to tell the story of Hades better or made it visually better in any way. Going forward in my life, I don't think I'll ever judge a single-player game for not having 3D renders and cutscenes. Hades pulls off this art style and storytelling style so beautifully that I now realize that what I thought I preferred in the past is entirely not necessary to telling a great story. So moving on from the surface level art style of the game that pulled me in, the story based in actual Greek mythology is what kept me constantly pushing for more and more playtime in my sessions. I really couldn't get enough of getting back to the house after a death and going through all of the new exclamation points, handing out nectars and ambrosias. Occasionally, I'd be a little burned out by the gameplay loop and want to take a break after my death, but as soon as I was back in the house and did my dialogue, I was ready to do one more run, just to keep my relationships and the story advancing. Speaking of the story, I've read about 3 books in my entire 30 years of life, so Greek mythology before Hades was definitely not my strong suit. I actually learned so much about Greek mythology through this game, and obviously a lot of the storytelling is stolen, for lack of a better word, from actual mythology, so that's nice to finally get that base level of knowledge that I should have already had in life to this point. Seriously, before this, I basically only knew that Zeus was a lightning god, and yeah, that's about it. I unfortunately have no idea where to draw the line of what's actual mythology versus what's specific to just Hades the video game, but I gotta say, learning so much about the underworld alongside Zagreus and his growth as a character was just fantastic. My wife is a huge fan of Greek mythology, so I of course got her playing Hades now, and she's absolutely loving it, so I'm assuming it's pretty accurate to real lore. As someone who never played a roguelike, I always assumed they would be difficult to tell a narrative story very easily, and maybe I'm completely off base with that, but as an outsider to the genre, I definitely didn't think of these games as like the story being the draws to them. I assumed roguelike meant quick, quirky, random, always changing gameplay being the primary focus and everything else being secondary. With Hades, I really don't know if the developers wanted to tell an awesome story in an awesome world, or if they just wanted to make a roguelike, and that's a really good thing. It feels like no aspect of this game is lacking. It's polished 100% of the way around. I'm probably going to try some other roguelikes after this, but I have a feeling Hades set the bar ridiculously high for the genre. Continuing with the story and world building of Hades, I really enjoyed the farming sim unlocking hearts relationship thingy. Now, I've never played a game with these, but I've watched my wife pour a metric fuck ton of hours into Stardew Valley, so I'm very aware of this as a game mechanic, and I think it fits really well into a roguelike and the House of Hades. I really can't wait to see how other roguelikes handle the hub area type thing, and if it's tied to the narrative of their stories. Earning nectars and maxing out everyone's hearts and being dripped information about the story bit by bit was such a fun and addicting gameplay loop. Speaking of maxing everyone's hearts, I really wasn't expecting the relationship options that you run into near the end of a few of the characters' hearts. I gotta say, this is the first game where I accidentally gay fucked a dude, and it was alright, but I really gotta start clicking through my dialogue options a little slower, man. I did even it out and make it ungay by banging Meg. So, yeah. Anyways, this is a boulder. I've never spoken to a boulder, but apparently to get this guy's companion, I was, in fact, supposed to speak to a boulder. This was the only single thing I had to Google to unlock in this entire game, and that's just because of the game's flow and storytelling with nectars and ambrosias, but ultimately, they're just a currency earned while farming. Watching Zagreus grow as a character while he interacts with the other Greek myths, seeing the flaws in some and the strengths in others and how they change throughout the story molds him, and that's just awesome to go along this journey with him. The only other bottleneck to advancing the story, obviously, is playing through the escaping the underworld portions of the game, which is easier said than done as someone who's never played a roguelike before. I didn't Google what boons or weapons or aspects or any of that stuff. I just tried stuff, and ultimately, I think it led to me enjoying the game way more than if I had just looked up how to play the game efficiently. But we're talking about the story, so my bad, I'll talk about that stuff later. At some point during the getting good process of playing Hades, I think I kind of advanced the story as far as I could, outside of getting past certain checkpoints, those being the bosses of the underworld. I eventually caught on to Meg's dashes and Lernie's mechanics pretty quickly, but I really struggled getting past Theseus and the Minotaur, and of course the final boss of the game, Hades. This bottleneck ultimately was no match for me getting to the end of the story eventually though. As Zagreus' character grew, I grew at picking better boons and button mashing in the correct order. All in all, I really enjoyed forging my relationships with every individual character, learning more about them and Greek mythology in general. My favorite character in the house was probably Dusa, and her bit about getting kicked out of the house and returning was probably my favorite interaction in the whole house. As much as I did love the story and atmosphere and world building that Hades offered, I felt like I just had to 100% this game, especially considering I fell in love with the gameplay too. I haven't played a lot of single-player games over the years, as I said, but I did recently start up the Dark Souls series, and as someone who's usually playing multiplayer, I talked in those videos as well about how those games scratch the competitive itch with their difficulty. When playing through Hades, I realized I actually loved it for a lot of the reasons that I enjoy the Souls-like formula. In a way, and I'm sure I'm not the first one to make this comparison on Earth, but roguelikes and Souls-likes are very similar. You repeatedly attempt to overcome your previous life, or run in Hades' case, to progress further in the game until you eventually reach your goals. Obviously, with Hades being a roguelike, you get the complete randomness of it all, which, coming from Dark Souls, I thought I disliked that aspect of the game. I play Dark Souls a very particular way. At least in my first playthrough of these games, I just stick with a dex build so I can kind of consistently compare the games as I review them for the channel. If I died in Dark Souls and I came back alive with like a greatsword that wasn't right for my build or something, I'd be pissed. But thankfully, the developers of these games aren't as stupid as me, and they managed to make the gameplay loop both moderately difficult, not on a Souls level or anything, but still beatable with pretty much any weapon or boons you decide you like. The difficulty in overcoming the 4 bosses of Hades were undoubtedly some of my favorite moments of the game. Learning the movesets of the respective bosses and how certain boons could just shred them when I got good. The first time I had Divine Dash and got to Lernie, I actually wanted him to start mass firing projectiles at me. It's nice to just have a different experience every time you escape. For like literally your first 100 runs, nothing feels too similar. No doubt, I'm gonna try more roguelikes after this and see if the genre really is for me like I found with Souls-likes, or if Hades just so happens to be one of my favorite games ever made by sheer coincidence. I love that Hades has no difficulty selector, and it's just a building block loop of learning how to play, struggling with certain enemy types, learning how to beat them, getting to a boss, getting stomped, finally getting good, and repeating that cycle until you can clear the entire game in like 15 minutes. Which, by the way, for a lot of the gameplay B-roll here, I'm just going to be showing a few different runs with 2 of my favorite builds on one heat while trying to get PB finish times. I've never speedran a game in my entire life, but I love consuming speedrunning content on YouTube for the last few years, and Hades is the first ever game where I feel like I've gotten pretty competent enough and understand it enough to actually try it out. Maybe one day. Before I ever got good at the game and was dropped in Tartarus, I was a little overwhelmed with all the new mechanics that I'd never seen, considering it's my first roguelike and all. I was overwhelmed with the different types of currencies, figuring out what they were, the different boons, and all while still trying to learn to control my character. Definitely just felt a little bit overwhelming at the start. But Hades, thankfully, does a great job of making everything self-explanatory and pretty quickly. At its core, Hades is not a difficult game to grasp. You only have a few inputs, and once you know what the currencies, keepsakes, and keywords all mean, you can start building upon those fundamentals to truly understand the game in just a few hours. I hate a game that you put 10 hours into and you're still not exactly sure what the gameplay loop even is. Everything in Hades sort of just organically happens. I didn't have to Google anything in this game to keep things progressing, and I enjoy that as someone who nearly always plays their first playthrough of anything completely blind. In my entire 100% journey, I only had to Google to unlock a few hearts. I missed talking to that boulder, and I also had to Google to finish up unlocking some of the weapon aspects. Everyone else who's 100% of this game, I feel like complains about getting all the keepsakes to 3 stars as it is a grind, but I was enjoying the game so much that it flew by. I had no issues whatsoever getting them all to 3 stars. By the time I had finished all the character arcs and story of the game, I probably only had 5 keepsakes left to max anyhow. I'm glad during my struggles that I never decided to Google what weapon aspect and boons went together to make the most OP build or anything. I genuinely just tried things out, and when I liked something, I was sure to try to remember it and get it again in the next run. I think once I hit a certain point, I had a real grasp of what synergized well together and what didn't. I felt like a true expert in the game because I really just tried any and everything at least once. Let me tell you guys about my favorite build. I know a lot of people like Zeus chain attacks and Aphrodite's insane damage, and yeah, I'm no different. I'd jump on those if I got them, for sure. My favorite weapon ended up being the rail, using the aspect of Iris. This is the aspect that buffs your attacks if you hit yourself with your special, in case you don't remember. Using the rail with Zeus chain lightning attacks, plus eventually getting the jolted and double lightning strikes are enough to clear out any room, but let me tell you about my hammer setup, dude. If possible, these are the 2 hammers I want. Cluster Bomb, followed by Rocket Bomb. Cluster Bomb turns your special into 5 different explosions that can be dropped on a single target to completely annihilate them, or spread it across the entire map. And Rocket Bomb turns your special into a direct shot rocket launcher. When you combine these though, you get 5 rockets flying out of your character's face. So if you just go up directly to an enemy and point blank them with 5 rockets, well, for one, you're gonna kill them. But this also activates your buff as if you stood in your own rocket blast and buffs your regular attacks too. Playing with these 2 hammers, hitting enemies close up with your special buffs your DPS to levels that I hadn't seen in that point of the game. I mean, look how fast I can just nuke down these bosses with this setup. It's actually silly. Any of the high damage boosting specials works really well with this. I'm curious to these veterans who are hearing me ramble, is this a common build or something that's ever used at a high level? I don't care really because I had a blast using it, I'm just curious. This gameplay loop, one of my favorites ever, really, has kept me pushing to pursue my 100% in this game. In fact, I kind of wish I had something else to do in the game now. Since I've completed all my hearts and got all the Steam achievements, I've kind of sort of felt a little empty inside. One thing I didn't max out in this game is the guy in the far western bedroom chamber. You can dump currencies into him and you get some sort of rank up, but from what I can tell, that didn't seem to be unlocking or doing anything. Is that just a currency sink, or what's up with that guy? Maybe it's unlocking new cosmetic unlocks for the house. I'm really not sure. Obviously, I didn't buy every single house renovation either. I'm not that mentally ill. One more bit of gameplay that kept me going for a few days was getting a 32 heat run cleared. From what I can tell, Googling, it seems like a 32 heat run is no easy feat. I found a Reddit thread saying that considering that less than 8% of players have the Steam achievement for a 16 heat run, it's safe to say that an even smaller number of players have completed a 32 heat run. I'm sure the population of players who consume Hades content are far more likely to have done a 32 heat run, but let me know. Is that impressive? I actually loved using the sword or blade or whatever it's called with the dash strike hammer and Artemis upgrades. That was my main way I had beat the game the first time ever, and the first time I beat 8 and 16 heat as well. But I had to switch it up for the 32 heat run. I did try using the bow with the aspect of Chiron, and that got me pretty far, but ultimately I ended up having to use the rail with a build similar to the one I spoke about earlier to get my 32 heat clear. I really enjoyed the heat system. It gave this game more life than I thought it would have after I initially beat it. I think if I just had to do the time trials against myself and keep doing 0 heat runs, I wouldn't have ended up 100%ing this game. But the hours I put in trying to get that 32 heat run just made me fall in love with this game that much more. All in all, I just really loved this game. It's reopened my eyes to single player games not just being these giant open world fetch quest crapapaloozas. I'm definitely gonna try myself another roguelike. or light? Seriously, guys, what's the difference? Should I try Hades 2 next, or an entirely different game to see if I actually just enjoy the genre? I've heard great things about The Binding of Isaac and Enter the Gungeon, and I've always thought Returnal, since that game came out like around the time PS5 came out, that game looked really cool. So yeah, what's something I should try next? I'm curious what you guys think. As for me, I'm gonna go cry in the corner now because I have nothing else left to do in Hades, so what am I even supposed to do in my life now? I appreciate you guys watching this much, and of course, if you could please hit me with a like, share this video with your mom because she loves my content, or, you know, leave a comment. All those things help me out a ton. As always, thank you so much to the tier 2 channel members. You can join the channel down below for just $1 or something like that, and yeah, that's it for me, guys. Peace out. Until next time.